old-fashioned first Wednesday hootenanny. Big crowd, game early. People were here at 6:30. That's when you know, oh yeah, you better get seated. So welcome. It's really fun to be here, and it is actually a first Wednesday. It's incredible. If you can turn your phones off now, that would be good. For those of you, I think I know everybody here, but if you don't know, the bathrooms are in the basement. You have to take the elevator, go to the basement. There aren't steps unless you go outside, so you don't want to do that. I want to turn the program over for a minute to Jacob Pelletier, who's the Community Programs Officer for Vermont Humanities. In just a minute, I will come back and introduce our speaker, Josh Jackson, and get out of the way because he has 80 slides and a lot of the story. So sit back and relax.
We're going to Paris. You can't keep us from that.
What's that?
We're going to Paris. You can't keep us away.
See, there's an active and intelligent audience here. Here's Jacob Pelletier.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out today. Today's our first in-person program back for the Snapshot series, so it's really exciting to see everyone come in. Make yourselves at home, everyone coming in right now. I work with Vermont Humanities, and I've been working with Bob for a while, and I just want to thank you all for coming and supporting this program, and especially Josh, our speaker tonight. Really incredible stuff. If you haven't already, I see a great copy of Last Night at the Telegraph Club, which is this year's Vermont Reads book. So feel free to check that out. We have an exhibit from the Museum of the Chinese in America coming up to Manchester, Vermont. If anyone wants to make a trip to see that exhibit, that'll be up in display until mid-April. And if you love the book, we also have a live stream for this program from South Burlington the day after the eclipse. So if you're looking to do something and get to know the author a little bit, she'll be in conversation with another Vermont author, M.T. Anderson. So we're really looking forward to that, and tons of other programming throughout the year, so be sure to check us out online. And all the work that Athenaeum does to do different programming, we are great partners and really thankful for that. So thank you all for being here.
On the piano on the way out, there are some slips like this. This is all of the programs we have coming up in March and April. Grab one of these, stick it on your fridge. If you donate enough money, we'll print them in magnetic stuff next year. There are also the Snapshot brochures for the second half of the season, also right there on the piano, so you can get caught up with all of the programs that are coming up. So both of these are right on the front of the piano. Going back to the script so I don't make a mess. Bob Jolly, St. Johnsbury Athenaeum. Thanks for coming. Seriously, I want to extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsor for the entire Snapshot season is the Vermont Department of Libraries, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Alma Gibbs Donchen Foundation. Tonight we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and to be inspired in community. It is really nice to see everybody here. A lot of familiar faces. Before I say anything else, if you are a St. Johnsbury resident and you voted for us, thank you so much. It's the town appropriation. We do it every year. It's 20% of our budget. It's a really big deal to us. It's very important. It helps us do these kind of things. So thank you so much for that. Also, we have underwriting from the Autosaver Group, and they are a terrific sponsor. I can't turn this into a commercial, but thank you to the Autosaver Group. Phones, bathrooms, right? A couple of events, and then I'm going to introduce Josh. Tomorrow night, right here, 7 o'clock, we have a live presentation called Stories from the Vermont Queer Archives. Meg Tamalonis, volunteer curator of the archives, discusses how collection objects mark various milestones, from pride events to legal rulings, and considers why some parts of the queer community aren't well represented in the archives. She'll explain why there aren't many artifacts from the era before the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, and some ways in which we can continue to gather and learn about Vermont's many queer histories. Meg will be here through the Vermont Humanities Speakers Bureau, so we do have a lot of things going on with Vermont Humanities. On Saturday, March 16th, we're going to have Sarah Frechette here of Puppet Kebab. She's bringing these Czech marionettes, and she's going to do a show about Snowflake Bentley. This is really going to be a fascinating thing for all ages. Bring your kids, your grandkids, just bring yourself. She's going to set up right here, and this is an exhibit we have going up about Wilson Snowflake Bentley. That should be a fabulous program. It is at 11 o'clock. Hurry up, Bob. It's on that slip of all of the events that are coming up. That should really be fascinating. The next Snapshot event, again, it's in the brochure, hosted by the Norwich Public Library. It's Through a Sheep's Eyes, Pets, Livestock, and Wild Animals with Mary Lake, who, if you have animals, you know she is a famous shearer. And if you've seen sheep shearing, it's a wrestling match, and Mary Lake is famous. That is March 13th at 7 p.m. You can register online through Vermont Humanities to receive the link to the live stream. And now, let me introduce Josh Jackson. Josh received his BSME from Yale in 1989 and promptly bicycled across country to San Francisco, where he worked for Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E as we called it out there, on energy conservation. A desire to bring head, hands, and heart together led Josh to Heartwood School in Massachusetts, where he fell in love with timber framing and ecological building. In 2005, Josh co-founded TimberHomes Vermont, now a worker cooperative specializing in timber framing. In 2019, Josh went to France with his wife and sons for a 14-week? 10-month sabbatical, which turned into 4 years, culminating in the chance to participate in the rebuilding of Notre Dame. Please welcome Josh Jackson.
Hello, good evening. It's lovely to see so many smiling faces here. This has been up on the screen for quite a while, but I do want to start just by saying thank you to a few different people groups. The first would be my wife, Geraldine. I would not have gotten the chance to do this if she hadn't said, yeah, you could go and spend 6 months in Normandy. I'll take care of the kids while you're gone. And I did. I came home every couple weeks, but it was a big lift. And so thank you to Geraldine and Olivier and Matisse, who you meet in this slideshow. I also want to acknowledge my dual citizenship, which is Grasa Geraldine, thanks to Geraldine. And I'm wearing my dual citizenship right now. So I'm going to take off the other thank you, which is right here. This is the little company that I am a part of. It's a worker co-op, and when this opportunity came my way, I had to ask my colleagues, hey, can I go and become a Desmonts? So they all said, sure, you can do that, despite the fact that I do a lot of design and estimating work, and it left others in the hot seat for those things. And then I want to thank this crew of people. So we'll meet almost all of these folks in individual slides at some point, and I'll come back to this picture and introduce you to them one at a time. But I specifically will draw your attention to three folks in here. So on the far left there is Hank Silver, and it's really, he's the most important person to me and to my journey to working on this project. He was a student of mine 15 years ago at the Yestermeyer School down in Waitsfield. He was a carpenter up in Montreal, and he thought it would be cool to learn about timber framing. At that time, I was teaching a lot of workshops, and he came and he said, oh, wow, this is really cool. I was in the process of, in fact, the project of the class was an addition to my own house, and he said, I'd love to help you finish that. And he came and spent 6 months with me. And then years later, Hank is now a really talented timber framer in his own right with a company down in Massachusetts. And he got really interested in French timber framing, and specifically the organization we'll be talking about in a minute. And he invited me to come along for the ride, which was just incredible. So the other two people in this picture that I want to draw your attention to, right here, this man in the middle, this is Remy. He doesn't look, wait a minute, that's Remy. No, sorry, that's Remy. Gosh. See, now Remy is 62 years old. He's the patron. He founded the business Desmonts. Is Remy Desmonts, and I was about to mistake him for Pierrot's 21 in this photograph, but no, Remy is the patron. And then right over here is Remy's son, Loïc. So Remy and Loïc Desmonts are the Desmonts, and they so graciously invited me and welcomed me, and we'll be talking about some of the hospitality that they shared, along with Patricia, Remy's wife. So I don't have a script. Bob is much more organized than I am. This will just dance around. I'm going to share a bunch of pictures. I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Notre Dame, but I am not a historian, really. I'm a timber framer. And much of my stories are really about the people that I got to be with. The culture in France is just an incredible thing. If you have a burning question, feel free to interrupt me. I'm under no compulsion to leave at any time. And so I'll be having open questions at the end. But if you have a burning question, feel free. Just stick your paw way up in the air. Yes? Qui est le chef? Ah, the chien passed away. That was Lou and Loïc's chien. Oh, geez. Now you got me. I don't remember the chien's name. Yeah, it's okay. It'll come to me, though. Le chien était toujours là. Yes. I do sometimes these days get confused, and I end up in French, and which I am not fluent in, but it still pops out. So yeah, we'll come back to this picture at the very end. But I want to start with this. So this, everyone probably has this image or something like it burned in their mind from April 15th of 2019, which is right when Geraldine and I were talking about and finalizing our plans to go to France on sabbatical. And I remember thinking at the time, how horrible. And then that little voice in the back of your head says, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if you had a chance to, but no, that couldn't possibly happen. And then when we were in France, I remember seeing an edition of Paris Match, their People magazine kind of thing, and it had all these wild ideas for what to do with Notre Dame. How should we rebuild it? And there were greenhouses, there were stained glass ceilings, there was a spire just of light. There was an architect who suggested that we should celebrate the fire by making a flaming roof. And then there was a swimming pool on top, which was my personal favorite. I still think that could have been a contender. And I'll take this slide just as a moment for some of you, I'm sure, know more about the history of Notre Dame than I do, but I'll just give my very brief history, and we'll revisit little stories about it. But this building, we joked, we Americans all kind of arrived in January of 2023 to start working together. And I remember sitting around at the Gîte, the little B&B that they had rented for us to stay in, and talking about how it's the chance of a lifetime. And it was probably Hank, because he's constantly making wonderful puns and jokes, who said, no, this is the chance of 10 lifetimes. This thing's been here for 800 years. You'd be, 10 of us would pass before you get to build it. So the cathedral was conceived by Maurice de Sully, who was the Bishop of Paris at that time, in around 1160 or so. And the first stone was supposedly laid by Pope Alexander in 1163. They finished the nave portion of the choir portion of the cathedral in about 1189, so it took them about 30 years to do the first third of the thing, maybe we could say a third, and then they finished the nave around 1250, and they spent another 100 years finishing other parts, building the two monstrous towers, adding flying buttresses. And one of the things that just stuns me when I think about how much work it is the extent to which they would get something done and either realize that there was an issue, like, oh wow, the foundation is being destroyed by all the water coming off the roof. Let's tear the roof down. Let's build higher by a couple of meters so that we can, and then let's add to the flying buttresses, we'll incorporate gutters that will spout out of gargoyles to jet the water far away from the building. The amount of work to take all of it apart and down and then redo it. Or, the fashion has changed. Let's add these giant rose windows. I think that was in 1250 or so that they did that. And They took apart whole sections of wall and put in new stained glass windows. Or much later, when Viollet-le-Duc got a hold of it, he turned a rose window a half a petal because he thought it would look better. Just a half a petal, one of those rose windows. We'll come to other stories. I'm going to advance now to this group. So when it burned down, there was quite a debate, as you saw, about what should they do. Should they build something totally different on top of it? How should we do this? And there was a small group of people who really thought it should be rebuilt as it was, à l'identique, which means identical. And a lot of people said, well, we don't have the trees, we don't have the skills, it would take too long, no, we couldn't possibly do that. And it was in no small part due to this group of people, Charpentiers Sans Frontières. And this is a picture of one of their projects that they did. Charpentiers Sans Frontières is, in this country we have the Timber Framers Guild. In France they have a number of guilds, carpentry guilds. And those guilds are very powerful and deeply skilled, but they're not necessarily historically focused. And here in America, similar story, the Timber Framers Guild as a whole is mostly interested in promoting timber framing. And then there's this other little group, smaller group, called the Traditional Timber Frame Research Advisory Group. And they're really into old buildings and restoring old buildings and doing things in the ways that they used to be done. Over in France, they have Charpentiers Sans Frontières, which was founded by this guy right here, François Calom. And he met a Croatian man in France who was still hewing with axes, and he was fascinated by this, and it drew him into this whole search for the traditional ways of doing things. And he's part of the French Ministry of Culture, and he founded this nonprofit organization to try to safeguard the savoir-faire, the know-how, the ability to use the old tools. And these folks, they organize reunions all around the world, really. They did one in Maine recently. They've done them in Lithuania, they've done them in Estonia, and often in France. And this is a picture of one that they did in France. Behind is like a miniature little cathedral, which is actually where Leonardo da Vinci is buried. So this is in Amboise. Leonardo da Vinci was invited to come in his later years to the court of, I'm going to forget, it was King Francis the First. Or anyway, he was invited to come. He only actually lived for 3 years after that. When he died, they buried him somewhere else. The French love to dig up dead people and move them around. I don't know if you know this, but it's amazing. And he was moved into this. He's buried now. His remains are underneath this miniature little cathedral, and they're rebuilding in this picture the apse. So on the choir of a cathedral, you have a rounded portion at the end generally, and we'll see a plan view of that a little bit later. So here they're rebuilding this apse, and I'm hopping back for a second so you can see that's Lou from Desmonts. I don't know who is behind there, but they're pit sawing some timbers. These timbers are all hewn. You can probably make out the sort of rough finish there. That hewn means that a log was transformed into a rectilinear timber using axes. That's what hewn means. And this business of hewing is really integral to Charpentiers Sans Frontières, as well as their traditional layout techniques and the use of hand tools for fashioning joinery.
Why is that, in the previous picture, why is that curve there to give it more strength?
You know, sometimes those curves are really very specifically there, for instance, to give headroom, truck buildings or curved braces. You get the triangle, but the triangle's pushed out of your way in the use of these naturally curved timbers. Some people say that they were doing that just because they cut down all the straight trees and had to use the crooked ones. But it's beautiful. It can be very functional. Like ship's knees are an extreme version of that, where they'll actually cut the roots of a tree right where it's and use those sections which are very curved, and that would have to be strong.
I read a little bit about him, and he said the curves and the vitruvius curves of the quarantine gives it much more strength.
Well, yes, that's true. Here it might be because when you curve it, you end up with an intersection that's kind of perpendicular right there, and then over here it's closer to perpendicular than it would be if it was straight. I can't say that that's why they did it. It's harder to work with curved stuff in most worlds, but in the French scribing tradition, it isn't particularly any harder, and that's the thing that shows up in many buildings in France. They're not always square. In our world, with 2x4s and 4x8 sheets of plywood, it's way easier to be square. In a world where you're going to individually scribe, and scribing is the act of laying the pieces of wood above a picture, full-size picture of what you're trying to make, bring the actual pieces of wood, lay them up in various, and then hold a string and mark the joinery from this piece specifically to that piece. And it doesn't matter if things are straight, it doesn't matter if they're funky sizes or shapes out of square. And all these things are difficult in many modern systems and not very difficult if you're using this French scribing system. Anyway, I got invited to go down by Hank. Hey, I'm going to be at this reunion in Amboise. You should come and check it out. Kind of last minute, he invited me. I went down there, and I got to meet Francois. I got to meet Remy in the front there. I got to meet Loïc up there, and there's Pierrot, much younger, and Hank was right here, and I had a great time. I didn't actually really participate because I just came for the tail end weekend, but I did participate because at least half of all French work is eating and drinking. Good wine, good cider, great food. Yeah, really fun. So it was this group, Charpentiers Sans Frontières, who really, and Francois, and there are others that we'll talk about as well, who really pushed the French government. Now, we can do this. And they actually went out and cut down a bunch of trees, and they brought them out in front of Notre Dame, and they reconstructed one of the trusses, hewing it, assembling it, pegging it together, all hand tools, and then lifting it, tipping it up with old lifting techniques, shear legs and pulleys. Hey, look, we can do this. The trees came from right here in France. It's possible. And which is not to say it was only them. There were 3 architects, chief architects on Notre Dame for the reconstruction. One of them is Remy Fromont, so there's 2 Remys in the story. And Remy Fromont is also passionate about traditional timber frame construction. And indeed, as we'll see, one of the reasons they were able to reconstruct the building à l'identique is because Remy Fromont had done his master or his PhD architecture studies on Notre Dame. He went in with his Cédric Tranceau. The 2 of them studied that whole building, did drawings of every bent, took pictures all over the place, measured everything, notes about what the joinery looked like. An amazing record, without which it would have been impossible to know, well, how you could have a historical precedent from existing buildings around. But that work really was essential to knowing what the thing looked like before it burned down. They also had, of course, nowadays they can make cloud pictures with computers and scanning techniques. So they had that. But when you see what those generate, you can't, the joint itself it's muddy enough. You can see that, oh, the timber was this big and this is the height of that stone pilaster there, but you can't see where it was pegged or, yeah, there's a lot of detail that's not present in those kind of things. So this group, Charpentiers Sans Frontières, and Remy Desmonts, who's the carpenter. I mentioned Remy Fromont is the architect. Yeah, it'll be hard. Are a large part of how this came to be. I wanted to just give you a little picture of where we are. So here's Paris down in the bottom right corner, which all of this is really far north in France. France is big. I was like 4 screens below to the south, living with my family. And so it was a long trip, like 10, 12 hours of train rides to get from my house to up here where the workshop, the Atelier Desmonts workshop is. And this is a little zoomed in picture. So the workshop is right here. And then Remy lives right here. And we got to live in this amazing village, Le Bec-et-Loing, which you may have heard of. Because there's a famous abbé from the 11th century. There's also a famous permaculture farm.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, I got to go to that permaculture farm and walk around and meet the guy who started that. Yeah, it's really cool. It's beautiful. You should go.
This is amazing farm there.
Yeah. And this is just pulled out of Google Maps, a picture of the workshop. So, and I know it's a little bit old because this is their original workshop right here. And a couple years after, which this business is small and fairly new. Remy had a whole career as an ébéniste, a fine furniture maker. He went to Iraq and Saudi Arabia installing beautiful French moldings and cabinetry. And then he got fascinated in 2007, so not that long ago, by hewing, and he turned his attention to this whole world of restoration timber framing. So he built this shop, and then they built a little office over here, and then a couple of years later they built the new shop. And this picture is probably, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. I could have found out, but I didn't think to. To prepare for doing Notre Dame, they built a new shed here. They built another shed. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. They built another shed over here to house their sawmill, which used to be in here. They bought a couple of containers and built their office out here so that we could all have, all 20 odd of us, because it was a 12-person company prior to winning this contract. And they had to get the office out of the way so we could all eat our fancy lunches together. And then they erected an enormous tent that you'll see pictures of, within which to assemble the whole roof of the nave. Incredible. This picture is taken in September of 2022. Once they had said, yeah, you could come and join us on this project. And they invited a whole lot of people from the Office National de Forêt, so their version of the National Forest Service. They invited all the architects, they invited engineers, and then like any large public works project in this country, I'm sure our company would probably not be allowed to bid on a really large job. You're not bonded at the levels you need. Desmonts was not bonded at the levels they needed either. So they ended up collaborating with a much larger historic company, Perrault, which is down a little in the southwest. Well, southwest of Paris, not in the southwest, but a few hours to the southwest. And between the two of them, they won the contract to do the choir and the nave. So we'll see a plan view. Some of you probably know what I'm talking about already. The choir and the nave are really old, whereas the transepts, which is the cross part of the cathedral, is relatively modern, relatively meaning it was done in the 1840s, 50s under Viollet-le-Duc. They completely rebuilt that. So that was all sawn timber, whereas the choir and the nave was all hewn timber. So the reconstruction was really many, first off, many different trades, and then also just within the world of carpentry, there were 4 or 5 different companies, because there were 2 on the choir and the nave, and then there were, I think, 3 different companies that worked on the transepts and the spire, the amazing spire. Not to mention all the masons and the zingaries and there's lots of companies. So they had this large meeting to get all these, Perrault came, Desmonts was there, the Forest Service was there, the engineers were there, the architects were there, and they also invited a bunch of people. There were a lot of people who wanted to be involved in this, but maybe were just small independent craftspeople, and a number of them were there, some of whom got hired by Desmonts, some of whom Desmonts subcontracted, like, oh, why don't you hew all these rafters and then send them to our shop, or all these tie beams. So it was a gathering where we looked at pictures of the forestry, they tracked, so they had to go all over the country to find the wood for the trees that were used in this project. Are magnificent trees, 200-year-old trees, enormous oak trees. The tie beams are 15 meters, so a little more than 45 feet long. Each rafter is 14 meters long, and there are hundreds of those rafters. They called the roof carpentry of Notre Dame the forest, le forêt, because it's a forest of trees. And they were meticulous about tracking where each piece of wood came from. So this giant board that you're looking at says, oh, these pieces are coming from this forest in this part of France. And in addition to getting, the bulk of the wood, I believe, came from the National Forest. I don't know the exact percentages, but there was a significant percentage of it that came from private landowners who said, I'd like to donate some trees to this magnificent project. And of course, they'd like to know where their tree ended up in the project. So each log that would come into the yard would have a ticket on it. And part of the job as we were working through it was always maintaining, once the log got cut in half, oh, you need another ticket, and tracking, like, oh, exactly where did that end up in the frame? Which piece? Not just, oh, it was a rafter, but it's the rafter in truss 11 on the south side level of specificity, which was at times maddening, but also really cool. And they were doing that not just to be able to tell people, yes, your tree ended up here, but they also wanted to be able to say, that tree that really misbehaved, all of those misbehaving came out of this forest over here. What's going on there? And learn about soils are causing that, winds are causing water. Learn what's the wood doing? Why is the wood doing what it's doing? So that was a whole realm that I didn't get much involved with, other than keeping track of tickets when I had to. Here's a beautiful example of Remy Desmonts really figuring out ways to make this thing happen. He built this whole model because, there's the question, can we build it? Then there's the question, well, how would you raise it? We don't know how to do that anymore. He built this model both to show people what does it look like. Models are very, very, they're tactile, and you can talk a lot, but when you have a piece of wood that you can touch and show someone, I'm going to tip it up like this, and these are going to go in, and then these are going to drop in. It's a very helpful way of convincing people this is a great idea. And then he also, of course, had folks in the company building full-scale joinery models. So that's obviously a small thing at like I think that's a 1/10 scale. That doesn't sound quite. Yeah, that's a 1/10 scale. It's about 5 feet across. Yeah. And then these are full-scale chunks showing joinery. And then we were looking at different kinds of axes, axes. So they were very specific about which kind of axes you should be using that were historically of that period and what the shape of the axe should be. And to me, this is a funny example of like there can be a lot of rigidity and red tape in France, I sometimes felt, and then I just can't quite imagine going into a museum in America and having them say, sure, you can have this from the exhibit and take this one. Yeah, it's flickering, I don't know why. Yeah, well, I hope not. Or I hope you fixed it. So, yeah, it's a really cool museum in Troyes. If you ever get a chance, go to the Museum of Tools in Troyes, which has carpentry tools, it has shoemaking tools, it has candle making tools, all kinds of tools, and gorgeous displays of them. And they said, yeah, come on down. And then they said, yeah, you can take all these axes from the basement, because of course they have tons of ones they haven't polished up, and you can take the ones that you like, and they were loaned to a group of blacksmiths who made axes following these historic patterns that we were able to use in our work. So now we're looking at a plan of the cathedral, and this part is what's called the choir. Oh no. Okay, you gave me a fright, Bob. This part's what's called the choir right here at this end, and this rounded part's called the apse, which the framing in the apse is extraordinary. That's not the part that I got to work on, but the framing in the nave is extraordinary as well. So down here is the nave, and right here is the transept. You can see the spire right here, this X in the middle, that's the spire. And then these are the two giant bell towers that were added later. So they started down here. They started in 1160, as I mentioned. They got to about here, I think, in 1189. They had their first service, I think it was, in 1189, and then they kept going, and they finished to here in 1250, and then they kept on building after that. And I find this picture interesting also in that you might think it's just the wobble of the screen up there, but it's not. You can see it's not straight, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that's not quite straight, it's not quite square, and we occasionally got frustrated by this because it's hard to build something that's not straight, not square, not level. And à l'identique meant both, well, we're going to try and do this with the tools that were used at that time, and also we're going to try and make it like it was, out of square, out of plumb, out of level, not straight, and that led to all kinds of little complexities.
Here's a little complexity. I'm going to switch the cable. That's going to be so annoying to everybody. It's going to take just a minute.
All right.
I hope.
Yeah, let's give it a try.
Because that's super annoying.
I have a question while he's changing.
Yeah.
I noticed 3 slides back that the pegs look like they were metal and not wood. The pegs in the joinery.
I'm going to go back those 3 slides. They're probably temporary.
Okay.
So they're called
They
drift
were
pins.
black. They were black and they weren't traveled. They were.
Yeah, if it was in a setup that was that when the Charpentier Sans Frontières project? That's because they're going to take that all apart.
Okay.
So they had hundreds of these. We have a dozen. If you do a lot of scribe work, then you often end up with more of those. But it's very hard to get a wooden peg out. So they would have been probably pegs with a little square rectangle and a circle in the middle. And you can stick another one of those in there and weasel that thing out of there or tap on it. Yeah, those are temporary pegs to, here, I'm going to try this because last time this worked. There we go. Oh, maybe not. Oh, we're going to, you guys don't have to go anywhere either tonight, right? All right. Yeah. In this picture, or?
No, it's much closer to where we were.
Okay. Oh, yeah, those are totally yeah, those are exactly. That's a steel pin tapered at the end, and you can see the little tang with a hole, so you can stick another one in and twist it to pull it out of the joint. It's just for temporarily putting things together, but being able to take them apart. Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about axes. When I get this disheveled, you'll have to help me out. So yeah, this building is nothing straight about it, and then nothing's the same either. I mentioned how they would like tear stuff down and fix it. Well, these are the 11 trusses, principal trusses in the nave. So the nave is consists of the portion of the roof between the transepts and the bell towers, and it had 11 principal trusses, and between each pair of principal trusses there were 4 secondary trusses. And then there's all sorts of longitudinal framing and braces that are going between those things and supporting different levels. And you could see that they're different if you, they're not all the same. So here's truss 2, and then here's truss 3. And you can see truss 2 had a full king post going all the way up there. Truss 3 doesn't have that. And you can see that, or it's maybe hard for you to see this, but the little tiny post here at the edge is not the same. One of them passes the faux arbalatrier and goes down and hits the tie beam. The other one just stops right on top of the faux arbalatrier. So they were thinking about it and figuring it out. And one of the things that's fascinating is that this carpentry was happening really at a cusp moment in carpentry's world when they were moving from a lot of half-lap joinery, very simple, just passing things that you cut half out of each one, and starting to really embrace mortise and tenon joinery. And they were figuring out what they were doing, which I find we don't do that in the midst of a building so much. But they did that a lot, not on purpose. We do, it's true. But I also think about it's like, yeah, we don't generally build buildings over the course of 200 years either. And to keep a building straight is when we put a thing in storage for a couple of months and then go back to, what was this? How was that? And do you imagine, like, okay, so it took them 30 years to build from just the choir. No wonder it got a little crooked headed over to the nave. Uh-oh, no, it's back. Bob, you need a little blue refreshment now and again. Yeah.
And you knew that about these details because that architect
Exactly.
had done that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Not only that, but they had gone around and they had taken a bazillion photographs. So when we would be working on one of these trusses, they would give us a whole packet of the plans for each individual truss would be many pages, because they would have photographs. Well, here's what it looks like right here, and in here, and in here, and here. And we were trying to make it just like that. And I go, no, it's coming up later. Things wouldn't be the same in the same truss. Like you can see these brackets right here. So what's going on? This is the top of the vault, right? Which is pretty crude. It's amazing. On the inside, it's just perfect. Arching, how they make them so beautifully perfect is beyond me, in stone no less. The tops of them is kind of rumply and they didn't bother, but you're 20 meters up in the air. I think top of wall is 20 meters, 60 feet, something like that, before you even get to our carpentry. So that's what this line is here. And then this is a giant stone wall, and that's that stone wall that they were like, oh geez, the foundation's getting destroyed. Let's take the roof off and build that up a couple meters and add these internal gutters that are going to feed onto the flying buttresses. And then sitting on top of that stone wall are what we would call sills. And it's two sills running on top of the stone walls, and they're connected, as you'll see in some pictures later, by little mortise and tenon étrasions, these little tiny, dinky little ties to tie the two sills together. And then there's a third flying sill. And there's these brackets, there's these brackets right here that support that inner flying sill. Complicated stuff. I liked this. I learned a lot of funny little things, like they call sills sablier. Sable is sand. Because they would put a little sand on top of the wall, put the wood down. I'm not fluent, and sometimes I'm like, I think I get what they're saying, but I'm not 100% sure. I understood them to be saying, well, they would put it in a bed of kind of sandy stuff, and it would give the wood time to settle onto the stone. And things that look hard and very rigid, you've seen those brick buildings that are going like that. You don't typically think of brick as a fluid thing, but so all things are fluid given a few centuries. Yeah. Anyway, different. They weren't the same. So they 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could see little subtle differences in all this. And then, okay, I think we got it. 7 through 11 were all the same. Like there were not really any differences. It's really cool to see that they were constantly experimenting, and then they got there and said, all right, that's good enough. So right after that meeting that happened in September of 22, a bunch of us stuck around, and Remy Desmonts, he just loves to show people cool buildings, and he just toured us around and showed us a bunch of contemporary to Notre Dame buildings. So this is a barn that was built by the Templiers at the time of the Crusades. This is on the banks of the Seine, a kilometer up from the banks of the Seine, and it's from right around that same 1200, something like that kind of time frame. And these enormous oak posts that were this big across. I could stick my entire arm into some of the checks in there. And it's just so fascinating. This was about getting a little into the feel of the thing. And I love these double braces. You didn't see those much in Notre Dame, but what a beautiful thing. This is another building that was from that similar time frame. And then a beautiful barn. This is just 20 minutes away from the shop where we were working, and has been turned into a gorgeous wedding reception space. And Remy would constantly interrupt the work to do another kind of work of like proselytizing and sharing his delight. So I went to this building that we're looking at during, like, oh, we're in the middle of working. Oh, no, we're going to see a building. Come on. it was because the architects, they had to come once a month to keep an eye on us in theory, but I realized quickly they really coming because it's way more fun to walk around the shop than it is to be in an office in Paris. And they would come up and we'd have these great lunches, and then we'd go and see something, and in this case we were there with an entire tour bus full of the architects, including Remy Fromont, not Desmonts, là. And then sometimes it had nothing to do with Notre Dame, but it was just beautiful, and he wanted me to see this. On the weekend, Remy would often come and scoop up us Americans and drive us around and say, you got to see this. This is this well that was hand dug, 60 meters deep, so it's 180 feet deep, hand dug, 2 meters in diameter, huge thing, all brick lined all the way down, and then these incredible wooden gears. And there would have been a horse that would have, or an ox, or some people maybe, that would have turned this thing that would cause the rope to rise and the bucket of water to come up. It's just amazing.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You had these great lunches. Could you tell us where they were and are they still there?
Yeah. We're going to come to some pictures of those. Yeah. I don't have any real restaurant pics for you. But if you go and you tell Remy I sent you. So this is Remy right here. This is Remy. And we didn't just eat well and drink well. We also started hewing. And indeed, it was challenging getting the plans, actually. We were supposed to have finished we were supposed to do hewing throughout the process, but because the plans were delayed and the finalizing of the plans was delayed, we ended up doing most of the hewing in the beginning, and everybody was hewing. So this is Miles Jeunesse, a person that was in that first photograph. I think he was in there, yeah. He's from Vermont, heavy timber, lives in Huntington. Hewing opposite, on the same timber, Remy here. Behind them is Marlon, this 22-year-old kid from England whose father's a timber framer and a green woodworker, and he was the fastest, cleanest hewer. And he'd only been doing it for a few months, but he had the touch. And he did it a lot. And then a bunch of French guys there in the background, Pierre and Theo and Alexis. And then they do have a fascination. You see, this is hewing right here. So the baker in the next village who would provide the bread for us had taken a stencil from an artist, Maurice Pommier. We'll talk about him I want to remember to talk about him. Maurice did all these fun drawings. He's an illustrator, and he also wrote books on the art du trait, which is the French system of layout, the scribing that I was talking about earlier. And this baker got a hold of and made a stencil of a Maurice Pommier logo that he was working on. This is Maurice Pommier did this logo on this sweatshirt, and he gave this to the baker. The baker got it from him. I don't know. Anyway, Loïc shows up with this loaf of bread with people hewing a timber. And yeah, we were hewing, and there you go. There's where you get that great lunch. You just have to be there on the 6th of January, which is the King's Day, Galette du Roi. And of course, work stops. Out comes the cider and the Galette du Roi, which were all cut right on the timbers. And this happened, there was never, I don't recall a week that went by that we didn't have some reason that we had to have a little party, which was really fun. But we did do work. So this is the first major work that we finally got to get our paws into. So this, you're looking at a plan of the sills and the tie beams. So I was mentioning the sills. These are the sills, and there's 3 of them running along here. And then here's our 11 trusses. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 trusses in the nave, and in between each of them there's a line indicating, oh yeah, there's a secondary truss there. So there's 44 secondaries, 11 primaries, and and so we had these very, very detailed drawings from the architect, which I'll zoom in on a couple of these from the architects and from Perrault, who would take the architect's work and turn it into shop drawings. And then I love this. This is like, Remy, give me that piece of melamine. Shh, 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 shh. This is what we're building. Let's start. Remy was an inspiration to me in his ability to get things done really fast I mentioned how they built a bunch of stuff there just for this project. And we were at work one day, and this guy comes walking in, and he's got chocolates, and he's giving out chocolates, and this is definitely a politician. Yeah, it turns out it's the mayor of the village, and Remy, of course, grew up in the next village and knows the mayor, and he has carte blanche to build whatever he wants. In France, where it's like takes you 3 years to get a permit to do anything, Remy just puts up the building, and he'll talk with the mayor about it later. So there's you can see in this next picture, we're working on some sills, but I'll tell a little story about the little shed. I pointed out where they put this shed way back in my one of the first slides. They decided we should be building principal trusses out in this shed a little later, a couple months from now. And Hank said, you know, the feet of the truss are going to be out in the rain, and out here was dirt, and the shed was concrete. This is on a Wednesday. And Remy said, you're right. Thursday, the mini excavator shows up. Friday, they're setting forms and putting in rebar. And Monday, I come in, and Remy is there in muddy, tall muck boots, spreading out the concrete. And then in the following week, they're building a new little shed roof so that just like diameter, at the same time as we're waiting months for the plans to come to do the sills, Remy's put a building up in a week. It was fun. So this is the sills right here. These are the two. I mentioned these little tiny things tying them together. And then there's this flying sill to the inside, sablier volant. And then there's these little bracket elements right here that are the chapeau de console. And we're bringing in an enormous 15-meter long tie beam. Those tie beams weighed about 1.5 tons, 3,000 pounds. And this enormous telehandler that could put its feet down and be a crane, crazy machine, is driving them in. And even that machine started to beep at us if you got it fully extended with one of those tie beams.
Excuse me, that's one tree?
This right here is one tree. This is not. These timbers are scarfed together.
No, but the one that's lifted there.
Yeah, that's one tree.
And that's how high?
Well, you mean how tall was the tree?
How tall is the tree?
Well, I don't know how tall the tree was, but that timber is 50 feet long.
50 feet?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How wide were the stone walls at the top?
They were about 3 feet wide. Yeah. So this is us now. I love this picture because it's just a great moment of international collaboration. So this is Martin, and none of these people are actual Desmonts. I mean, we were employees of Desmonts for a brief period of time, but this is Martin, and this is Theo. This is a pair of, 30-year-old French guys. And Martin was our chef d'équipe. So quite a little responsibility on his shoulders. And then this is Mike here, who's an English guy who's fallen in love with historic framing, is working on his PhD, and Liz actually in Dordogne, ex-military, fascinating character. And then here's Hank Silver, and they're having a little powwow. English and American are two different languages, and then there's French, about how we should scribe or cut. I'm not sure exactly what they were debating, but it was a really fun mix of people and languages and ways of doing things. Just some tools. I love this thing. You can see how the French Revolution succeeded. This is a carpentry tool. It's called a bisagu, and it's a chisel, like a paring chisel on that end, usually be about 2 inches thick. This thing is 6 feet long. You do see miniature ones. And then on this end is a mortising chisel, so it's only a 1/2 inch thick. And generally, here we almost always are working our timbers up on horses. And there they often are working the timbers down on the ground. And that has in part to do with scribing. If you've laid it out above the floor drawing, you want it to lay it out close to the floor drawing, low. You start really low. Also because if you're laying a whole bunch of timbers up, you can get a stack of timbers if you have a complicated thing that's quite high, 6 feet high. But often you have timbers that are low to the ground, and so then you can put your body weight on it, on this tool, and you can pair with it and you can mortise with it. Yeah, a cool tool. I enjoyed using that thing. You can see how heavy these are. We had to put 5 or 6 people just to roll one. And so we would put these really long clamps on here just to tip that thing up from one side to the other. And this picture really gives a good understanding of how wonky the building is. So it's not quite, well, it's showing you a couple different things. One, you can see this, there's a couple red lines in here, and these are sort of truth lines. These are truly level lines. And you can see that, like, at this end, this timber right here is at that red line. Time you get over here, there's quite a gap between the red line and that timber. And then you can also see this is a section cut, right? So someone has sliced a section through the building and is showing you all the timbers that it cuts in yellow. And you can see that, like, the height of these is dropping dramatically. It doesn't mean that the building was sagging that much. That's really more a reflection of the fact that the building wasn't straight. So when you cut a section through it and you're on a very steep roof, you end up seeing a line that's not level because, one, it isn't level, but also even more, it's not straight. And so when you cut a straight plane through a thing that's a sloping surface that's curvy, you get these kind of distortions. And then you can see the particulars of, oh, we're trying to do this à l'identique. Okay, that means that this one is measured at 1.8, this one's at 1.9, this one's at 1.89, and 1.23. These are all metric numbers, which for me was challenging at times, but it's way more rational once I got used to it. And then you can see they're measuring things to the millimeter. Like the top of this pilaster here is 67.084, which millimeters, millimeters, yeah. So it was really fun and challenging at times and frustrating at other times to try to actually follow all this and keep track of exactly where all the subtleties and the no, this one's not like that one kind of things are. Another beautiful example.
I'm sure you're really smart and everything, but how did they do this 800 years ago?
They didn't care as much about the millimeters. They were really smart. They were smarter than us.
Communicate from Jacques to whoever, if they weren't literate or numerate.
Well, the beauty of scribing is it doesn't depend on numbers, and the French system really does not depend on. So the way they would lay things out was often with dividers, and they would. You can develop incredibly complicated geometries with their system. We call it stereotomy. They call it developed drawing. The French term is l'art du trait, and it's the ability to take any surface and lay it down on a piece of paper. And you could have a hipped roof, and you could lay this side down, and you could lay that side down. When you look at one of their drawings from a high-level practitioner of this skill, for someone like me, I've done a 1-week workshop in l'art du trait. You can't, there's so many lines on the paper, it's impossible to understand it. But none of them involve numbers. They're all swinging an arc here, measuring a distance here with dividers and transferring it there. It's really fascinating, the elevation of skill that you can get to without being literate or language or mathematically literate. How they communicated that from the guy who's working there to the guy who's working 20 years later over here, I think that's part of why the building goes like that. But yeah, I don't have an answer for that really.
Well, you wave your arms around a lot. That was good.
I find that it works most of the time. Wave here, wave there. Yeah. But yeah, you can see that someone didn't get the memo. This guy cut it like that, and this guy going and cut it like that. And we were trying to mimic that, along with this one's here and has a little jowling here, but this one doesn't have any jowling. And oh, hey, these guys managed to miss the, these guys managed to miss the brace that's going up in the other direction. These guys crashed right into it. Ooh, that's hard to. And then so could we get permission from the architects and the engineers to kick that one up just a little bit so the joinery's not crashing? Because they didn't mean to do that. If they had thought about it, they wouldn't have been doing that, because now the pegs are running in interesting times of where are we allowed to take liberties? Because à l'identique, it's funny, there's lots of reportage out on this, and NPR, CBS, and then all the French stations, and it did amuse me that no power tools were used It's not in the least bit true. We use tons of power tools and calculators and computers and all, but which doesn't, to me, take away from what was happening there. But sometimes following, like, really, should we do it? We should do it like that, even though it clearly wasn't a good idea. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's still there after how many years?
800 of them. But I didn't point it out, but in those early drawings, anything you saw, the ones that Remy Fromont had made that allowed us to rebuild it à l'identique, there's lots of purple in there. And the purple was all, they had to add a bunch of bolts here, this timber rotted out and had to scarf a new one in. Now, how much of that is because the design was fundamentally flawed versus the roof started leaking and no one did anything about it is very hard to know. And it was interesting to see that very little real change in the joinery had to be done. There's a couple places where the engineers said, well, the wind speeds that we're designing for now are higher than what they had to sustain, and it was there 800 years, but we want you to do this. A little hidden extra cog in a housing or sort of thing, not dramatic. Yeah. So this is us setting up this is that flying sill, the inner one, and I got to lay out, do the piquage, the hanging the plumb bob and marking the joinery out on all of these the consoles, these little brackets that supported the flying sill. And then Miles got to do this layout of all of these braces, which you can see the whole thing's been kicked up. Like this piece is not level, it's almost touching the floor here and it's being supported up on a horse there. And all of that was to get it so that this joint would be, so that you'd be scribing to a plumb surface right here. This is going to be plumb no matter what you do, but if we had laid this down level, then the underside of that flying sill would have been not plumb, and all of a sudden you're trying to pick big distances when you're hanging your string, which makes it much harder. Boy, I will say this about scribing. It's almost impossible to describe scribing in words. It's much easier to have a string and a couple pieces of wood. You see what I'm talking about? That gap there? You got to pick. Yeah. Anyway, this was all set up like this because, oh yeah, it'd be way easier if that surface was plumb that we're trying to visualize on this brace right here. And then that whole thing had to be, it wasn't all just level, which of course is what you would do if it was a new building. No, those are all going up and down. And so if I back up a second, there's this red line right here. And then there's also, we had a Z, these are called Z lines, like some reference point in the building that you can trust. And there's an offset Z line here. And so when we were assembling, when Thomas and I were putting these, scribing these, we had to put lines on them that the next person can say, that's the Z line. Okay, so if I want that to be plumb, I want that Z line to be plumb. It's not the piece of wood, because it's a hewn piece of wood. There's nothing you can stick you would flatten spots to put a level on, but you need all these reference lines so that you can bring them back and know that that piece of wood, that weird shaped piece of wood, is exactly where, or it's in the same theoretical place that it was when we had it sideways. Now we want to put it like this, but we need to know it's exactly like that. So we had lines on all these pieces. And then here, this piece is moving. These sills right here are neither level nor perfectly straight. So they were following a layout on the floor that's doing this. There would be a Z line on the floor here that we had put onto this piece, for instance, so that we could put them in the right place. And then we moved on, so we worked our way up from the sills. That's what we first got, like, okay, you can go for it. Those plans are good for the sills, and yeah, you can go ahead and start to make all those consoles and flying sills. And then we got permission to go ahead and start making all these upper longitudinals, which are supporting the false ties in the secondary trusses. And then we had to take a break and go cut some trees down. So this is another great, like, hey, let's stop working in the shop and go out and meet the Perot team. So the carpenters from the other shop, they hosted us. They said, hey, come on down. We're going to cut some trees down. We're going to hew them. And of course, we're going to roast a pig and have a feast. And on the pig, I don't know if you can see this very well, but the pig was tattooed. He had axes tattooed on him. I apologize to any vegetarians in the crowd. The tattooing was done after the pig was dead, I'm 100% sure. And funnily enough, the pig had Napoleon written on the other side, tattooed on the other side. In France, it is still, to this day, illegal to name your pig Napoleon. An imprisonable offense. It was at the time. I don't think anyone would give you a hard time now, but Napoleon, which cochon is pig, French humor. French humor. And of course, the pig was carved with axes. Yeah. And then we had other kinds of really cool visitations. So this is a bunch of folks from the researchers who are part of the Forestry Service, or maybe they're just at a university. I never quite knew who they were, but they came out to talk to us about the pieces of wood they found. There's lots of, one of the cool things about heavy timber, firemen actually love it because heavy timber will char on the outside. And once it's burned about a ½ inch or so, it stops burning, it's insulated, and it maintains its structural integrity for much longer. Like a piece of steel will melt and just boom, in a fire, fail very abruptly, whereas heavy timber takes a long time to actually burn through. Lightweight framing like our conventional 2x4s and 2x6s, that's kindling, goes up really fast. So anyway, these are chunks of timber that were recovered after the fire, yeah.
It doesn't sound to me as though you were feeling much pressure from Macron about having this done in 5 years.
I was fascinated by this because it is true that I think a little bit of the like, we're waiting, we were often waiting, like we're ready to go. Where's the plans? Sorry, you can't yet do those. We haven't signed off on them. We were stuck for quite some time with half of the floor system built. And it turned out we had moved forward and they hadn't yet approved those plans, which resulted in a minor panic amongst those of us who had done that work, and I'm sure much more amongst those of us who had real money riding on the game and the responsibility for getting more logs if they said, sorry, no, that's not okay, we need you to do it this way, or that was all wrong. Or yeah, it was fascinating, the sense that there were tensions, there were real, of course there were real tensions. It's a huge project and huge stakes, right? They put a general in charge of it, Georges Alain. He was the whole, I don't understand exactly how it all works at that level, but because there's an architect, the chef de monument, then there's a person for the government who's like the owner, and then there's someone else that's like the general contractor, and there were exactly how that all worked. But Georges Alain, he was sort of the owner, the owner's representative. He was the government's get it done. And yeah, he would show up with his booming voice and say, we're gonna, les Jeux Olympiques, 24, will be done. It's not gonna be done for the Jeux Olympiques, but it is gonna be done in December of 24, it looks like. And
Almost 5 years.
that's very close to 5 years. And I was just stunned that when it was May, well, I guess it was April when we got to finally start actually working on principal trusses, which we thought we were going to be doing in February or even January, tail end of January. I thought, there's no way. There's no way. And I was amazed at how Remy Desmonts just kept right on smiling, kept right on being a gracious host, kept right on. There were TV crews coming through every week or two. There were busloads of architects. The Forest Service would show up. People would want to come and show us pieces of burned wood. And we'd all stop and we'd have a big banquet right after all this wood got put away. The tables came out. When the Festival of Saint Joseph, who's the patron saint of carpenters, came along, lo and behold, Desmonts and Sons has a dance floor. Who would have thunk it? They get this dance floor out. They've got enough tables and chairs for 100 right there in the shop, just stashed away over here. And then there's a big old band going and 100 people, and the electrician from down the street brings a few gallons of Calvados and Pomo. I don't know if you know what those are, but Calvados is like apple brandy. Pomo is some apple brandy and some hard cider. It's delicious stuff. Yeah, it was. And it got done. It got to, well, at least there. So I could have been in Paris tomorrow, Friday, because they're putting up. So in America, when you finish the timber frame, you put up what's called the wetting bush, which is a little twig of evergreen to thank the forest and the druid spirits. No one knows exactly what it, but anyway, that's what we do. And over there they call it the bouquet, and they're putting up the bouquet on Friday because, as you'll see at the very end, if you can stay awake that long, we're at 37 out of 77. What time is it? Oh man, I'm already 11 minutes over. I'm going to start moving a little faster. They stuck in the last. They stuck the piece. We started at truss 11, and they just put the zero end into the stone wall. We'll see it at the end. So anyway, the wood people came to show us these cool pieces of wood, and they're studying. They're able to see. One of the wild stories to me, I just don't think about these things. We were hunting all over France for these trees. I wasn't hunting for anything. The Desmonts crew was hunting all over France. The ONF was hunting. They got most of this stuff from right around Paris because the plague came through and just pretty much wiped out human activity for a couple hundred years, was, if I understood correctly what they were saying, that basically there was a really nice forest all around Paris, in part because there wasn't a lot of building activity for a long time, and the forest just was able to grow back. But they were studying these trees, and they can do dendrochronological dating. That's a hard one, which is to say that if you can match up pieces of wood from buildings that you know the date they were built approximately, and you look at the growth rings in there, you can see, oh yeah, there's this 3 years in a row that were really small growth rings, and then there's these 5 that were good, and they can build a historical record of growth ring data. And they've been able to do this in many parts of the world back 1,000 years or more. And so they were able to tell about these trees really when they were felled, and that's what the similar thing to why they want to know where that tree came from, so they can sort of forward thinking do this same kind of assessment of the forest. Anyway, it was fascinating as to people spending their whole lives just studying these tiny little growth rings. Yes, and here we are in April break, I think, and Remy, not only would he stop for TV crews and have cider and a party, but he would stop when my family came to visit. Oh, I want to show your kids. Come over here, Olivier. I want you to try this hewing axe. And my brother-in-law, Guillaume, and my sister-in-law, Fabienne, and their son, Felix. And yeah, just they don't let work get in the way of life over there. And it doesn't seem to mean they don't get a lot done either. So finally we got like, all right, you're good to go on this truss. Not all of them, but you can start on truss 10. We would get them like one at a time. Yep, that one's good now, that one's good now. And eventually they got them all. So here's the drawings that we received for truss 10, along with some like, not sure we're going to be able to assemble it unless you do this here, and discussions with the architect about whether we could clip that like that, because this seemed impossible to assemble otherwise, just the way things have to go together. How they did it in medieval days, who knows? But these are the drawings for the first truss that I got to participate in, which was truss 10. So I got to work on truss 10, then I got to work on truss 8 and 7. And here we are, working on truss 10. This is that shed I mentioned. So this is the brand new post that supports the overhang part. This is new concrete slab. That's the old concrete slab back there. And we're scribing this thing. It barely fits. We're working around posts and bringing these 3,000 pound pieces of wood in here and trying to snake these other probably 2,000 pound pieces of wood back in there, all with that great telescoping telehandler. Really fun tool to play with. And so you were asking about the good lunches, but Andy's gone. I don't know what I lost him. The lunches were amazing. Every day we would stop. In theory, we stopped for an hour and a half. I didn't generally stop for that long, but the company catered lunch every day. But it wasn't catered. two of us would go up and cook, and then one person would do the dishes afterwards. And we had a little sign-up sheet, and they got all these wonderful, locally made, in reusable glass jars. The part we threw out was the little rubber ring. It's like you're back in like 1940s America or something. And it would have great veggies, great tomato sauces, and we would cook some rice or some pasta, and then bread that had hewing axes on the front of it, and cheese. Always the cheese would come out in many different kinds, and people would discuss them. I'm not kidding. I remember, this is totally off topic, but I remember taking my kid to a skate park in the town near us, Alès, for an evening like expo to interest young kids in coming and doing skateboarding and trottinette, the little razor scooter thingies, and it was all these teens competing to do cool tricks. And the guy who owned the place, he was out there announcing, and he's like, when he saw something he really liked, he'd call the person, he'd give him a little white ticket, a piece of paper. Wonder what that's about. So when the thing finishes, he says, all right, you come and redeem your tickets for what? Fromage, a little goat cheese and a little bit of bread. And the teenagers are saying, well, I like a hard one, and I like mine a little bit riper. So this is me after lunch with Zachary and Will. We would have our lunch, and then we would go have a little siesta, because life is for living, yeah. And in amidst this thing started as, a 12-foot thing, but it got interrupted by a rafter, so it's got this tiny little tenon on it. And these big, huge pieces of wood sometimes turned into these tiny little things. And this is Mathieu. I'm forgetting to give you, introductions to all the people, but Mathieu was an ébéniste, so that means he made like fine furniture. He really was into making stairs, but the guy could do anything. All the tools, wizard with them. Anytime you need a little jig to make something fancy, Mathieu would go whip it up. We should have little tiny scrapers so we can erase our lines well on oak, because you can't erase them. Mathieu cruises off, he makes 20 little scrapers, turns the handles, files the burr on them, and puts the little metal rivets in them, boom. Magicians. We got to do a bunch of pit sawing. Some people like it better on top. I like it better on the bottom. You get sawdust in your face, but it's so much gentler on your back. I recommend the bottom if you have a chance to do any pit sawing. And this was so we would hew, and I say hew, they made a compromise, thank the Lord. They would saw two faces of the timbers, and then they would actually use a chainsaw often to juggle, which is cutting. You'd snap lines, and traditionally you'd do this all with axes, but we would chainsaw to the line. Then we'd use axes to knock off the big chunks, and then you'd go along the side with the hewing axe and finish the surface. And then we'd turn it up and finish the two sawn surfaces. So a compromise. So some timbers, we would hew a square section, and then we would pit saw them in half. And these are specifically for these things called the aiguille pendant, the suspente. They're actual hangers, and it took me a while to understand what these things were about. So here's them in the truss, and you may recall a picture of the truss. These are these two timbers. Imagine that whole thing stood up. What are these for? And for a long time I thought it was for this walkway, and then no, I finally came to understand that it was there because the timber work was the crane. When they built the cathedral, they would build the walls, then they would put the trusses up, and they would use the trusses to lift the formwork and also the stones for the vaulting, the ribs in the vaulting. And so these pieces were actually there so that they didn't break the tie beams when they were lifting giant stones off of them. And indeed, they would be present on both sides originally, apparently, and then they might take them off to reuse them somewhere else. This is a picture of the
beam is going across this way. It's got great weight on it, so it's bow. Those are keeping it.
Right.
Or they're essentially it's keeping it relatively level.
Yes. Well, not only is it a heavy beam, but then they're going to lift giant stones.
So this is what they were.
Yeah.
The beam was hanging from these. It was
Right.
The force.
Right. Yep. Yep. So this is one of the simpler secondary trusses, of which there were 44. And these we got permission to make them early on. So these were getting cranked out. These were, it was a 3-day affair for a crew of 4 to scribe, cut, fit, finish, and take one of these out. So they could do, when they got their systems dialed in, they were able to do not 2 of these in a week, but close to it. And then finally, we got to put the whole thing up. So this is that tent. You can see the white canvas up here. And this thing is, I think that was 15 meters to the eave of that tent. And then of course it goes up. And they built these shear legs and invested in a whole bunch of rope and pulleys to have a party with the architects to tip up a couple of trusses by hand. Really, it's not how they were going to do it on site, use a giant crane on site. But there it is. You can get a sense of the scale of the tent, and that's the 15 meter, so 50-foot wide tie beam there, and one of the trusses. And there's the second truss, which, so that's truss 10, and then that's truss 9. I guess maybe I got to work. We're back. And here's Thomas. I mentioned Thomas a while ago. So Thomas is on walkabout, sort of. He's in one of the guilds, becoming a carpenter. They go into that guild at like 14, 15 years old, very intense schooling. If you're, you might go to college, or you might go into one of these trades, one of these guilds, and then they travel and they go to different shops for 6 months at a time. So we had one apprentice that was there when I first arrived, and he left, and then Thomas showed up. And then there were other folks that I was interested to see how many folks were, like a fair number of people making midlife transitions. I used to run restaurants, and then this fellow Jerome shows up, and he's with us for 3 weeks, and he's doing a program at a nearby trade school, and he's transforming himself into another world. We're getting close to the end of my time at Normandy. We get to go down and visit the cathedral, get a whole tour of the thing under construction, including this crazy virtual tour, which is in a parking garage underneath the front space of the cathedral, where you put this helmet on and you really feel like you're in the building, and they have you walk. Oh, come over here. There's like a virtual guide who's just a hologram, who suggests that you stand on this platform and we'll raise it. And you're not going anywhere, but you sure feel like you are. And you go flying up, and there's the rose window, and you can walk right up to it. And it was really, if you're in Paris, I think some of you are going there, I recommend you go do the virtual tour. I mentioned that the carpentry in the roof was called the forest, the foray. The forest of staging was unreal to me. I cannot imagine what the staging cost. The work that they did to temporarily support the flying buttresses, I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can. That's all just there. After the fire, they said, wow, the buttresses were built to prevent the 400 tons of lead and oak and timbers from pushing the walls out. And well, with all that gone, they were worried the buttresses would push the walls in. So they built these under all the flying buttresses, and then towers and towers of staging. We got to tour through they were rebuilding various bits of stonework and sculptures, these crazy. A lot of these are Viollet-le-Duc, who made hundreds of new, like he took a lot of creative license, including one of the top figures, which was saved from the fire because they took it down to do some repair work on it right before the fire. Climbing up the spire was a sculpture of a guy who looked remarkably like Viollet-le-Duc. And we got to hang out with the chimera. So chimera are not gargoyles. The gargoyles, you got to be spitting water to be a gargoyle. The chimera are just these bizarre, these are Viollet-le-Duc drawings that were turned into sculptures. We got to see a little bit of what the other trades are doing. These folks are cleaning all the vaults. So in the fire, 400 tons of lead, much of it seeps into the stonework, and lots of rain getting on it, and salts from the burned wood were getting in the stone, and it was starting to show up on the inside of the stone as like white, and it would destroy the stone. So they plastered all the insides of all these vaults with 1/2 inch of bentonite clay, which sucks the salts out of the stonework, and then they scraped it all off. And I have pictures of it, but it's too many. It's going to be magnificent. It was dark and gray and old, like many things are after a couple hundred years, and we got to see some of the recently refinished. It's just sparkling white. The stained glass is amazing. The firemen did a brilliant thing. They knew, they were prepared. They didn't spray the stained glass windows, which would have shattered them most likely. They would have broken from combination of heat and cold and water and pressure. So you're standing right now, right on the top of the wall of the apse, looking back. This whole forest of staging is surrounding the beginnings of the spire. I can see a timber right here coming up. And then beyond that is what I got to work on, the roof framing of the nave, and there's the 2 bell towers. And we got to wander around up here 150 feet in the air with an amazing view of Paris, and visit with the stonemason who's rebuilding the whole end of the transepts. And there's the Hunchback of Notre Dame, just happened to drop by for a visit. This is so you can see this, or I can see, this is sawn timber. So this is part of the transepts. This is one corner of the spire, the framing in here, just enormous timbers, meticulous joinery, gorgeous. More bolts than was in our work because it was rebuilt in the 1840s when they were using more bolts than joinery. And one of the bells, size of the bells, just mind-boggling. And these survived. They did pillage during the French Revolution. They painted all the stained glass black. They decapitated most of the kings. That main door, when you come in between the 2 towers, there's, I think, 28 kings. Most of their heads were cut off. Many of them were just toppled, and they were buried, and then later recovered and renovated. But it was turned into the Hall of Reason at first, and then the Temple of the Supreme Being. And then Napoleon came to power, and he kind of reclaimed it, and he was actually crowned emperor in the cathedral. And then it fell into total disrepair. It was nearly sold for salvage. During the Revolution, they were melting down these kind of bells. This one survived, but they were melting these bells to make arms. And then Victor Hugo wrote his book, and there were no doubt other influences, but he was instrumental in getting people excited about the idea of bringing it back to its former state of grandeur, and it had a wonderful revitalization under Viollet-le-Duc and his partner, who was equally important, but whose name I'm forgetting. So now we're really coming to the end of my time, which I look at this, and it's a bittersweet memory. There's Hank on the right, who is the reason I was there, and there's Miles on the left. These are my housemates. There was also Zachary, who lived with us, and a fella for a little bit, Scott Carlson from Ohio, brilliant framer. And we were put up by Desmonts in this beautiful old mill. That wheel that you see back there turned. The Le Bec et Loin there's a little creek coming right through there, the waterway, and you could hear it creaking at night. And this was on my final morning. We have a few more pictures, but just gorgeous. Yep, there's those natural curved, crucky kind of things. Hank gave me a ride back down to my old town, and I've stayed in touch and watched the party go on. Here they are roasting pigs in front of Notre Dame. Oh, well, yeah, in front of Notre Dame. And the forest is growing. They're up to, I don't know, I counted one time. I think, it's 10 at the way back and 4 or 5 here. Just beautiful. And that's the forest, and that's the top of that. Oh, that's painful, isn't it? And that's the top of some piece of the spire. And here's flying in truss number 11, which I didn't get to work on. It didn't get started till I had left. Setting truss number 11. Flying in a secondary truss. And then just a golden goodbye. So this is the abbey from the 11th century in Le Bec et Loin. And I would bike, once the weather got nice, I would bike from this little village, take me about 45 minutes along a beautiful bike path, the Voie Verte. And I would go by this abbey and get out to the shop through the fields. And here's this last timber going in, and Hank wrote all our names on the end of it. So, and I got to be right beside him. There's Silver, Hank, and Jackson, Josh. And there's two very funny people. So Hank got these glasses to go over his glasses, and Remy says, "Let me see those. Those will look in French. Those will look good on me. Let me try them on." Always ready to smile and laugh and have a good time. And I leave you with this golden image because the memories are golden. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we just look at that?
Can what?
Can we just look at it?
Yeah, you can.
Is it, are you inside that tent?
That's that tent. Yeah. And that was done not just to have the chance to make beautiful pictures, but they were really, oh, that is frustrating. They were worried, this is all green oak, and oak is fairly mischievous wood. So it twists and it checks and it changes shape, and they were quite worried that it would not be possible to put it together when they got on site without a lot of fighting. So they concluded the best thing to do would be to assemble it and leave it like that, and then take it, as they were ready in Paris, they would take a truss down, put it on a truck, send it to Paris. There was talk of sending it all on barges, because I didn't point it out, but on that map, this is all just up the Seine, or down the Seine from Paris a couple hours. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, they put it all together so that they would be more confident that when they went to put it up, it would go together. Both, it meant that they actually knew it did go together, which is also a proof because it was very interesting, the division of Perrault largely ran the raising, and indeed it was Hank asked, "Hey, I want to be on the raising. Can I be on the raising?" And he was at liberty to do so, and what a lucky fellow. He actually spent he helped raise that, which only Hank, Antoine, and Pierre from Desmonts. Loïc went down a bunch, I'm sure Remy did too, but that's 3 out of the 20 or so people that were there that actually got to be on site. But yeah, this way they could say, "Oh, no, it went together. Here's the proof." So if something's gone wrong, it's not necessarily with our carpentry. Yeah.
I was just wondering if, as a craftsman, you had any special moments where you just felt like you were in the 12th century? Or was there any moments of recreating, not recreating, but creating in some way, connecting with those old times?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't use a hewing. I hewed a little tiny cabin in my early days of building, in my 20s. I hewed a little cabin, and it was really cool. But very few people get to do that these days. I didn't get to do a whole lot of it because I actually burst my appendix during this process, and ended up in the hospital for 8 days, and then back again for another 4 right during the. I sometimes wonder if hewing, because I did it for a week, and it was amazing to see, like, oh, the muscle learns, the body learns, and yeah, the use of those tools. There's something magical about that kind of work, no question about it. And it's through that I feel like, oh yeah, I can connect with that. You see these pictures in these ancient texts of, hey, that's the shape of axe, that's what we're using, and yeah.
We're time contracts.
Yeah, just to be able to touch a thing, contribute to a thing that has been around for that long, yeah, that's a mind.
And then also the
Boggling.
freshness of it.
Right, yeah.
How different would it have been to compare Cologne
Right.
now in Germany or
Right.
somewhere?
For me, it was a real treat. I spent 4 years in France, but a lot of that time I was in Vermont in my head, because I would I kept right on working for our company here. And so I would pass my days on Zoom or in my computer, and that's fun. I like that kind of work, but there was a real delight to be not speaking English to somebody on this side of the Atlantic, but instead to be rubbing elbows with Mathieu. Mathieu is the ebonist that I was working on that tiny little piece of wood, and he's such a sweetheart, and he didn't speak any English. So if I wanted, or very little, so if I wanted to communicate to Mathieu, I had to speak French. And Martin and Theo, same thing. They all spoke English some, but Remy didn't speak much at all. And Remy, I spent a lot of social time with Remy, and that was just a delight to be immersed in his world, seeing things that delighted him, and that well was holy moly, this is just to cover a well. Look at the care and the craftsmanship that went into that. And lo and behold, it's lasted a few hundred years as a result. Yeah.
You know, all of the collegiate Gothic buildings in America, all that woodwork is steel. Not to be a clod, but that they consider doing that since it's all hidden.
Well, sure they did. I don't know if you saw the picture with the 6 different concepts for Notre Dame. Like, oh, let's have a swimming pool up there. Let's make a greenhouse. Let's do something completely different.
No, I mean, just framing as you are, but doing it in steel rather than in wood.
Well, in fact, Chartres is I think that's concrete. It's reinforced concrete. So when I don't know if they lost that from a fire or if it just deteriorated, but they replaced it with concrete. And sure, all those things were on the table, and they made the choice, even though it's hidden, to rebuild it in this way, which to me is a very interesting thing. France, they are incredibly proud of their patrimoine, and the patrimoine isn't just the objects, but that man, François Coulomb, who started Charpentiers Sans Frontières, he and I'm sure other people, I just know that he was very involved in it, have gotten the art de trait, which isn't a thing, it's a savoir-faire, it's a way of doing this work. It is now a UNESCO World Heritage cultural artifact. I don't know exactly what the term is for that thing, but it's just as you would say, oh, this gorgeous cathedral is part of our patrimony, so is this way of doing this thing. And so when they chose to preserve Notre Dame, to renovate it à l'identique, part of what they're doing is they're keeping that knowledge alive, because a lot of people now suddenly know about this thing that is all over the news. They're talking about this skill that we have, this ability to do this. So yeah, I'm sure that there were some folks who were saying, that's crazy, let's build it in steel, let's cover that in fireproof powder. And they are doing, there's some firewalls getting built, they're putting a sprinkler system in now, which they didn't have. Imagine the savings. It was too expensive to do that at the time. Yeah.
Were the hewers responsible for maintaining their own tools, an edge?
Oh, yeah.
And is there a daily routine for tool maintenance?
I wouldn't call it daily. I would say, you hit a little bit of grit in there and you got a nick, or you're just getting dull, you go sharpen. Yeah.
It's up to the individual user.
Well, it was, but if you, like chainsaws, I'm not very good at sharpening chainsaws, and we did use them a fair bit. George, the guy from, he's French citizen, but he was born in Portugal on the far right. We got to go back to the very beginning. Let's see if it works. No. All right. Can I go this way? No. I got to go back like this? This is impossible. I can go really fast. I'm going to now show, I said I was going to do this, I'm going to do it. Anyone who is like, I'm tired, you are under no obligation to stay, but I'm just going to introduce you to everybody, and I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to tell you, so there's Hank, right there. Hank Silver, formerly of Montreal, then Vermont, then Massachusetts. Here's Mike, the English fellow, who figured out and really ran the secondary trusses. There's Miles Jeunesse, brilliant dude, who did all those chapeaux and was really skilled at raising and rigging. He does a lot of steeple renovations and barn renovations. Here's Mathieu. Oh no, there's Mathieu right there, who could make any jig, made the little scrapers. Here's Martin and Theo, these brilliant young 30, they're probably 30. Jerome, really talented guy, a long-term Desmonts person, would routinely get stuck doing things like building the new roof because he knew where everything was, and he's talented in many, many different things. Here's Lou. We have a lot of women that work at TimberHomes, and it's not common in the construction world, but I liked this. They had a bunch of women that weren't just, oh, you're in the office. Lou's out pit sawing, hewing. She did get stuck in the office a bunch too, because they're really good at that too. There's Loïc, 24 years old now, the patron. During this whole process, Remy was inheriting the business to Loïc. Antoine, young apprentice, he's in his 30s, one of the better hewers. He's one of the got to go on the raising. There's Remy, such a sweetheart. Pierrot, who came first to Remy at the age of 16 as a little traveling rabbit. Here's Solène, midlife transition. She's not too much, she's about my age, I think, and she's transitioning into being a carpenter, also is doing a lot of management. Adrien, who was just there, he was one of those apprentice kind of people who has now decided actually what he wants to do is farming, so he's off farming. And Solène, another young female carpenting apprentice working there. I think that's Marlon, yeah, that's Marlon, the young Brit, 22 years old, we call this the Marlon axe. Yeah, he sharpened that all the time. And there's, it looks like that's Zachary. Zachary LeBlanc, he works with Will Gusakov, who's not in this picture, but was totally there for the time that I was there. Super talented. He was like the translator, one of the better French speakers. This is Roman, another, oh man, why does my mouse keep disappearing? Roman, he's another traveling French carpenter. He was there for the early part of my time, and then he left and Thomas replaced him. That's me. There's Alexi. He's another young fella who's just exploring. And now we come to Georges. You need a chainsaw sharpened. Don't do it yourself. Give it to Georges. He's way faster and better at it than you are. Yeah. And if you need any little scraper made, go ask Mathieu, or even sharpened. He'd be quicker than you. Yeah.
Did they have any exceptional artisans like from China or the countries where they do very fine woodworking?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the tail of your question. Did they have?
China, countries like where they still do this kind of family.
Yeah.
Did you have any of those people coming over here just because they wanted to help you come back and they came to work on the people?
I'm not aware of anyone that came from China. I'm aware of people that came from England, the U.S., France, Spain. Was there any of it? There were a lot of other shops involved in this, but France actually has, Americans don't win the Carpentry Olympics, and yeah, there are Carpentry Olympics. It's the Japanese typically, the Germans, the French that win those Carpentry Olympics. So the French actually, their level of skill is extraordinary and including in traditional ways of doing things. There's people over there that are really passionate about it. And that was an interesting little side story, is there were people who were upset with Desmonts because they weren't being pure enough. That they were willing to saw two faces. Oh, that's cheating. There were people who were really upset about that. And those people, some of them, were super skilled. And there were a number of people that were doing bits and pieces around that Desmonts collaborated with, and that not everyone that I saw come through that shop is in this photograph. But yeah.
I'm just interested in knowing whether you compared the amount of time that it took originally to build this particular part of the cathedral with how much time you spent and what you attribute that to.
So yeah, I really don't have a good answer for that. I mean, clearly, to rebuild this in 5 years means that it's happening quicker than it did when it took them 30 years just to, but of course they were building foundations that are 9 meters deep and these stone walls that are 20 meters tall and and
I'm just meaning the actual part that you built,
Right.
not the substance,
Right.
the substrate.
impossible for me to say, and impossible really for anybody to say, because I don't think there's great records of how long the carpentry itself took. And the carpentry probably went along, certainly it happened over the course of a much longer period of time. But whether that means it actually took them more hours, I would assume that it did, because boy, a bandsaw, George could slab 2 faces off of a 50-foot long timber in about 5 minutes.
I know, because I know that with some English cathedrals, it was 300 to 500 years from the beginning to the actual
Right.
finish.
This was 200
Yes.
approximately.
Yes. So,
And to me, sometimes, just the fact that not only did they build it, but they debuilt it and rebuilt it a couple different times. They weren't as slow as all that. And to see someone who's really skilled and is doing it all the time, work with a hewing axe or, a handsaw,
it's pretty amazing.
it's amazing. And you easily forget all the hidden time that went into the machine that George is running and the power plant over there, and then the saw blade factory, and it's easy to ignore all that stuff.
Humbling experience, isn't it?
Rather. Yeah. 10 of them. Yeah.
We went to another presentation by somebody who worked, somebody down kind of near Berkshire. And he was definitely a smaller shop. And he talked quite a bit about the 2 different techniques of hewing, one involving using much longer handles,
Right.
splitting.
Yeah.
Did you encounter any of that stuff?
Yeah, so I very briefly mentioned so there's 2 different steps to hewing. And the first is there's really kind of 3. So if you're hewing all the way with an axe, you start with a log, you snap line, you draw on the end of it the square you're on both ends, and you snap 2 lines same time, because if you snap one, hew that side, the log goes, and then when you snap the other one, you have a thing that's gonna not. So you snap both lines, and then you stand up on the log, and maybe it depends a little bit, but every 18 inches, with that long axe, you're swinging it, and you're cutting a V-notch. And those axes, there's not one of those kind because it has a handle. The handle is like this tall, and the edge of the axe is generally about that long, and it's straight. And it's that way so that as you make that V-notch, the goal is that you're making a perfectly plumb V. And you're trying to make that V right to your snap line. Get there, move over, do the next one. You work your way all the way down the log, then you come back to this end, and they were doing this, it's just that they would shortcut that part. They would take a chainsaw, and then they would hop up with that same axe, and if you were doing the whole process with the axe, you'd still have that same axe in your hand, and now you turn, and you start at the very end of the log, and Mathieu, for instance, I would just watch him, he would just throw it up, bam, right, he'd be just 1/8 of an inch off that line, full swing, and you knock off the chunks in between. Then once that's the first part is juggling. I don't have a name for it, but removing the clapeaux, the big chunks between those notches. I don't have a name for that part, because juggling I think of as making the V's, right? And then after you've knocked all the wood off between the V's with that big axe, you put that one aside. And now you get down beside the tree, and you have a much shorter handle, and it's really a fine tool. And the finish that Marlin could leave it's not a mirror finish, because those axes have a curve to them. They can't be perfectly straight in either direction. They're slightly curved in this way and that way, so you can go in and out. You can get out of your cut. And they leave a beautiful scalloped finish that a skilled artisan can leave an extraordinary finish. But it's also one of those things that well, Marlon had a lot of practice, both as a little kid, because his father is a green woodworker and likes to work in this kind of a way, but he's also just, some folks have a genius in their body for certain things, and he had a genius for hewing, for sure. Yeah.
Josh Jackson will stay here to talk to each one of you individually. But at this point, collectively, we're going to call it a night.
There we go.
Thank you so much.